Hello. Hi, I'm doing well. That's the first question, I guess, for the Q&A. How are you? I'm good. Uh, I'm Darren Korb. I'm the audio director for Supergiant Games. I do the music for Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, and sound design and voiceover direction and all that stuff as well. Um, I'm going to answer questions, and you will be asking the questions, I assume. So there's a microphone on that projector stand up there. If you want to just line up behind that and pass the mic to the next person when you're done, we can do it. Hold on, hold on. I don't think that mic is on. Ah, there we go.
Is this thing on? All right. Terminal March is probably one of my all-time favorite songs, so I was wondering what went into the process of creating that song.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that. That's awesome. Terminal March, that one is, I use a lot of samples in that one, and strange sort of world instruments that wouldn't normally go with intense kind of trip hop sample rhythms. And so that part of what I wanted to do was just create like a really intense, distorted, kind of relentless sound that was sort of you couldn't easily identify the components of it because I've distorted them and added crazy effects and things like that. So that one I actually was one of the few pieces that I have almost nothing I played live. Like there's no live performance on that one, whereas in most of the other pieces there's some sort of guitar or bass that I performed myself. But that one's unique in that sense. And yeah, so the way I approached that piece specifically was we sort of sectioned off portions of the game. There's the beginning area of the game, which I did like 3 pieces per area, kind of like for that area, and that particular area was the sort of Byzantine, like a more Byzantine vibe, and so that was I did like a sort of middle of the road piece, a really mellow one, and a really intense one, and that was the really intense one that I made for the Byzantine section of the and then of course when you get out into the wilds that had its own feel. More Western feel, and then when you get further out into the Ura territory, then that's got its own feel as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
Could you talk a little bit about what inspired the song "In Circles" from the Transistor soundtrack, as well as the changing time signatures from 5/4 to 6/8?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so In Circles occurs, for those of you who aren't familiar, in Transistor. It's a song that plays when you're fighting Sybil, which is sort of like the main real boss fight that you have in that game. There's one later, but that one is sort of almost more intense in a lot of ways. And one of the concepts for that particular tune, which is not directly related to the time stuff, but I knew I wanted to have it was a staged fight, right? So as you progress through the stages of the fight, I wanted the tune to get more intense and crazy and messed up. And so what happens is, as you progress through the fight, I have 2 versions of every stem, and there's a clean version and a filthy, kind of bit crushed, chipped up, weird, vocoded version. And each of the tracks will start to switch to the other version, the messed up version, as the fight progresses. So that was something that I knew I wanted for that piece. Lyrically, I approached the tunes for that game as if Red had written all these tunes, and these were tunes that she had already written previous to these experiences occurring. And so the lyrics were not exactly on the nose, but could be relevant to what, that was sort of what I wanted to go for, was something that would have meaning based on what you were doing, but wasn't about what was happening, if that makes sense. And the time signature stuff, I was trying to do some interesting stuff with a little bit more mathy stuff, just because that's not the most eloquent way to put that. I said the word stuff a bunch of times. but I really wanted to do something that was a little bit more mathy because we're working with essentially like a computer virus bad guy, and so I just wanted to incorporate like sort of chippy, crushed, bit crushed, like that, some of that stuff with sort of more thinky, mathy time signatures to help, reinforce that basically.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. This is the most polite crowd. You guys are so cool.
Hi. Okay, this is on. I just want to know what, you make game music. What's your favorite piece of game music that you listen to that you haven't composed?
Oh, that's a tough one. Favorite piece of game music that I haven't composed. Well, I really, going way back, love the first game soundtrack that I was kind of blown away by was Marble Madness for NES. And so that entire thing, the whole, from start to finish, it's only like, I think it's like 15 minutes of music or something in the game, but it's really like, was sort of mind-blowing to me. Particularly the writing was strange, but also the sounds were so crazy and the way it used those sounds. And what's so nuts to me about that is if you play the arcade version or you play the Sega version, the composition is the same, but it's like higher fidelity, but it's not as cool at all. It's like orchestral, it's like supposed to be like an orchestra, but it's like bad orchestral synth sounds, And just the Nintendo synth sound playing that music that was, I guess it probably wasn't even written to be played with that. The arcade was first, so I assume they just kind of ported the arcade music. But yeah, the end result was something that was so weird and just like, that game is super trippy too. It's like you're in an MC Escher painting basically. And so I'll say that one just because it was like the first one that really kind of blew my mind as a kid.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So I was just curious, when you're creating new works, especially if you're going for a certain style of composition, how important is the context of, say you're going for something that's this kind of like thing, like say it's like jazz or something. How important is that context before, like researching that kind of music before you write? And do you think that that's super important for the creation of music?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yes and no. I think part of the thing, at least for what I've done so far, is, yeah, I want there to be, say, for example, for Transistor, I want there to be like sort of loungy, jazzy elements, but I don't want that to be the only thing. And so I want to make sure that I have a grasp of that stuff, at least enough so that I can inject some of it and imply it more than accurately reproduce that specific style. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think for me, a lot of what I'll do is, when I'm trying to approach a new style for something, I'll make sure I have at least some specific references. Maybe not even an entire genre of music, maybe just like a piece or two that I look at. Like I know for Transistor, I looked at an album in particular. I looked at "Speak for Yourself" by Imogen Heap. Was like a super, like I'm like, okay, when I was puzzled about kind of where to go next, I was like, well, let me just listen to that album and kind of see what I can absorb through osmosis and then go and do something, because that one part of, my vision for what Red was going to be like was maybe like an Imogen Heap, Bjork, like whatever, something kind of hybrid of a bunch of awesome people that I like. And so that, that, and then also OK Computer by Radiohead was another point of reference for me. So I'll have, sometimes I'll just have like a few things that I'll be like, wait, what do I like about this thing that I want to, and I'll go back and try to include some sort of tonal references for the most part.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is going to be kind of a strange question.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back in time and talk to your early 20s self, what are about 4 things you wish you could tell yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to like, I don't know, buy bitcoins. I don't know, like I tend to try to be forward-looking, and not, I don't have a lot of regrets generally. So yeah, like I don't know, make more friends like in college, play less Fallout 2 maybe, like instead like go something like that. I don't know. So, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi there. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the use of music as narrative, specifically in Pyre, and the decision to couch the minstrel music in English, which in this world where you have this like Latinesque faux language and only the player, therefore the reader, is understanding the lyrics of these songs. I was hoping you could talk about that creative process a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the language thing first. The sort of conceit is that English is like the Latin of this place, in that only like a handful of people will understand, and the language that they're speaking is sort of common language of this place. And so that's sort of the conceit for that, and that you, the reader, can understand this language because you're educated and whatever. And then the use of music as narrative. So yeah, we have a couple of things in Pyre where the music pays off or advances the narrative to some degree. Like during the end credit sequence, we have a dynamic song that will play different lyrics based on what happened to each of the characters in your party. For example, so that was a real challenge to try and just write just a ton of lyrics and a bunch of alternate lyrics. It's a challenge. It's a super long song. It's trying to talk about like what happened to all the characters, all these bunch of characters that you've traveled with for this whole game. So so that was a challenge. And also, in Pyre, one of the things that was both a challenge and freeing in a lot of ways was I allowed myself to be a lot more on the nose lyrically than I do, because when you're writing, just generally in writing, I try to be a little bit less, not less specific, but less direct, because I find that sometimes when lyrics are overly direct, it's not interesting. But the context of Pyre, where you have these minstrels singing about what's happening, it's like you kind of have to do that. And some of the like Bravely Brave Sir Robin thing, that is in there. So yeah, so the having the minstrels allowed us to do that a little bit more directly, and because we were doing that a little bit more directly, we were able to do things like the end credits, where we could speak directly to like what actually happened to the characters in the song lyrics, which is something that I wouldn't have wanted to do at all in Bastion or in Transistor.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
What was the most surprising or unexpected instrument that you used in the music of your games? And also, did you use any creative recording techniques in any of your soundtracks?
Sure, yeah. So I used a good deal of auto harp on Pyre, actually. A whole bunch of auto harp in that game. Also, for a few tunes before it broke, I used like a circuit bent Casio, like an old school Casio keyboard. It sounds super weird. It had like a theremin the guy put on it for me, and it was pretty nuts. Just mostly for like sounds, But so that's probably the weirdest instrument, I guess, I've used. I use all sorts of. Right now, I'm working with all sorts of strange. I don't know. I picked up all sorts of weird instruments.
Hell yeah.
So I'll talk about that at a future time. But gosh, what was the other part of the question? It was
any like surprising creative recording techniques.
Yes. So something that I know it's not. So I recorded the entirety of Bastion and Transistor from my closet in Brooklyn, basically. So that is a non-standard recording technique for most games. One thing specifically I'll about the voiceover for the games. So normally when you're recording voiceover, you don't want to have the actor too close to the microphone, and if you do, it creates something called a proximity effect, where it gets really boomy when you get close. And so usually you have a voice actor stand back a little bit, but because I didn't have a quiet space to record voice actors in, I close mic'd them like I would, someone singing a vocal for a song where you want total isolation, and I just kind of tried to fix that stuff that occurs when you do that with all the really loud sibilance and all the harsh stuff that happens when you get close to a microphone and the boominess, and fix all that with EQ and other things, because it was basically the only way I could record a high quality voiceover that wasn't noisy in the space that I had, if that makes sense.
That's super brave. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Quick question about when you're making genres and stuff. You like to make like frontier rock or like post vaporwave polka step or something. When you're making these genres, like how do you decide what elements of each genre to match together if you're like taking from existing genres?
Well, I think a lot of that stuff happens kind of after the fact, if that makes sense. So what ends up happening is I'll make a piece trying to pull together lots of different elements, and then I'll hear that piece and be like, that sounds like acoustic frontier trip hop or whatever, and then I'm gonna try to make more acoustic frontier trip hop to tie these pieces together and give them some sort of identity, a shared identity that connects them. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Right, yeah.
You took my question.
But I would like to say thank you for doing this, and also going back to the frontier trip hop thing, and you also did sort of that combination with Transistor and Pyre. Like, you kind of said it a bit already, but how did that, like, what was that first moment that it was like, oh, I'm actually kind of doing that? And how did that turn into more of it kind of turned into your style, or was it more of necessity because you were working with kind of limited things? Because you were, if I remember right, you in your interviews, you were usually in your apartment while you were doing all this stuff.
Yeah. The first two games were recorded 100% in my apartment. Pyre, I got a little upgrade and moved to the actual where the studio is, the Supergiant studio, and have a vocal booth in there, which is like a real luxury. So I got that for most of Pyre. Logan, I still record him remotely though. He's still in his apartment in New York now, so we still do that. But so the genre thing, a lot of that came from embracing the limitations that I had on Bastion, and that was sort of the MO for a lot of aspects of that project, was really leaning into the stuff you could do, just not doing the stuff you can't do well. You know what I mean? Just not even doing it. So I knew I can't. I don't know how to prepare scores for musicians. That's not something I know how to do. We don't have the money to hire these people. I'm not going to have an orchestral score for this game. That's just not a thing I can do reasonably well. But I know what I can do is I can produce stuff. I can make these beats, and I play guitar and record that, and I know the stuff that I can do in my apartment is the stuff that I will do. And so that was one of the constraints, and it really helped me kind of focus where to go with everything. And the other ingredient to that, I would say, is that I wanted to try and do something that I hadn't really heard in games before. I'd heard a lot of orchestral stuff, I'd heard rock stuff, I've heard synthy stuff, I'd heard chippy stuff, and I heard combinations of all that stuff. But I didn't feel like I'd heard more interest, like world music and other things, and I've heard world music, I guess, in games, but not mashed up with this other stuff. And so I wanted to try, in the interest of helping the music be transportive for the player to somewhere that they hadn't been before, I wanted it to be like a style of music that you hadn't really heard before.
Like especially with the frontier aspect, like that, it was pretty bonkers when I heard that the first time.
Awesome.
It was just like, it really worked, especially with Spike on a Rail. You really just digged into that guitar and it just made it something that I did not expect. And I was just, oh my gosh. It's amazing.
Awesome. We're glad to hear it.
But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, how you doing? So my question is, if you were given if you had the opportunity to choose any video game franchise or anything that you give the opportunity to compose for, what would be your dream project?
Yeah, so I've gotten that question before, and it's always interesting for me because it's franchises that I like already and that I think the music is good for. I don't want to do the music for that. I want whoever is doing it already to keep doing it.
Yeah,
So it's kind of a tough question. I mean, like franchises that I love in particular the first two Fallout games, like Fallout 1 and 2 are like some of my favorite games of all time. Would I want to make the music for that? Probably not. Mark Morgan did a bang up job, and I like, I don't know. It would be cool to work in that space, I think, but it's kind of a double-edged sword,
No, I get that. I get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty well established that you do a lot of mashups of different styles when you're creating different sounds or brand new genres that some people have pointed out. Are there any instruments or styles of music that you like that you would want to incorporate into a future project that you haven't gotten a chance to yet?
Yeah. I'm kind of fascinated by doing some more like stuff. Some of the stuff that I'm fascinated by right now outside of games, like I'm interested in like more kind of garage rock stuff, and like I'd be pretty interested to try to utilize some more of that actually at some point. It's not, I just have to find the project that it's appropriate for. If one of those were to come along, then that would be fun. I think. I'm also listening to like, I don't even know what it's called. This guy Lewis Cole and his band Knower, and they are sick. Knower, and this guy Lewis Cole, and he has a song called "Weird Part of the Night," and the video is amazing. But like that stuff, it's just like it's so funky and dancey and weird. It's just fucking weird. And I'm super into that. Like that's what I'm listening to a lot of right now. So I don't know that I would want to make that because I just don't think I could. Like I'm not good enough at playing instruments to like be able to do what this guy does. But yeah, it's like really inspiring to hear just stuff that kind of blows my mind and I've never really heard before. So check out Lewis Cole and Knower. They're awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
So while playing through Pyre, I realized how just how like much different variations on the different musics on the different music tracks, especially like the lyrics, and how every like especially like during the end credits and the final rites per cycle, how there are lyrics for every single team of this fantasy basketball game. So, like, my question is, how long or how difficult did it take for you to create all the different variations on the different tracks in the game?
Yeah, it took a long time. It was really hard, and it took a long time. Is the answer. The Never to Return tune that you're referring to, where that plays during the Ascension matches, during the Ascension rites. That stuff took me probably the longest, I would say, to write all the lyrics, because it's really like writing, like a couple of, basically like there's 9 versions of that tune, and I have to write like at least two unique verses for each one. I think it was like 3, maybe it might have been 3. But so, yeah, it was tough. And then I also did different musical arrangements for each one, incorporating components from that triumvirate's theme, their theme music, into that same piece of music. So yeah, it was like a really involved, probably the most ambitious thing that I tried on Pyre musically. I mean, one of many, like maybe a little overly ambitious things I tried on Pyre. But yeah, it was fun to do. I'm happy with how it turned out. It's one of those things where, because it's happening at a time when the player is not focusing necessarily on the lyrics, some people notice it, but sometimes it takes like, now people are starting to like, say, oh, hey, that's cool, like after the game's been out since July or whatever, so yeah, it's interesting. It was certainly really interesting for me to do. It was very challenging, and it took a long time. Thank you. Yeah.
So I missed the first couple minutes of this, so pardon me if this has been asked already. But how much of the game is these games are set in stone before you actually start to work on the soundtrack? Is there a lot of back and forth, like, oh, the context has changed, this is what's happening now, or is the game pretty much set and done when you get to work?
I get to work right at the very, very earliest possible stage of development. I'm a team member and I'm involved basically right away. So basically, pretty much nothing is set in stone when I start. It's all high level ideas. We want to make a game that feels this way, this kind of setting, this kind of genre of game, but we want to put this twist on it. We want to, and so a lot of it's just ideas. When I started working on Bastion, there was like a little gray box prototype, just like a little gray dude running around with no animation, and he had a hammer, and the thing that I was given tonally is like, well, one of the things that's cool is like, what if Cormac McCarthy made a fantasy role-playing game? It's like, and so I'm like, okay, I guess I'll make some music that sounds like that, and so, but this is all just sort of trying stuff out and prototyping. So to answer the question specifically, I'm involved right away, and none of it is set in stone.
Okay. Yeah, I asked that because hitting the Sybil fight in Transistor and getting through that, hearing the musical transformation that parallels her transformation. Like after getting through that and opening In Circles in the Sandbox, like I had to stop for the night, and I'm not going for a pun when I say I had to stop because I had a lot to process.
Yeah.
But,
awesome. Yeah. I appreciate it. He wasn't going for it.
I know. I had no other way to say it. It was what I was going to say anyway. I was like, oh, oops, but I'm running with it.
No, it's good.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. No, my pleasure.
Hi. Kind of going hand in hand with that. In Bastion, you had the two vocal pieces, Build That Wall and Mother's Theme. And when you... Or Mother on here, I keep doing that. When you get to the credits, you end up combining the two of those together to kind of have a round between the both vocal pieces. And I was just kind of wondering, knowing that those themes happen independent of each other in the original game, and you get to the credits, seeing as you were starting from the very beginning during production, at what point did you kind of know that you were going to be trying to merge those themes together to make them work as kind of a overarching story almost?
Yeah, that's a good question. I knew that pretty early. I wrote the music for the first trailer that we released for the game, and that music ended up becoming the backing track for Setting Sail Coming Home. And I liked the music so much, I was like, well, this is rad. I need to do a thing with this, and that I wanted to kind of use it in the game as at that moment was my thought. And I knew that we wanted to have songs when you encounter the other survivors that kind of represent them somehow. And my thought was, because we're going to have these two songs from these two survivors, it would be pretty cool, satisfying thing to do to bring them together at the end. And it's kind of like an old musical theater trick, basically, where you have someone singing something and then someone else singing something that seems unrelated. And it's kind of maybe over the same chord progression, but it's like a totally different thing. It feels different rhythm. And then when you put them together, it works, and it's always satisfying and surprising. So yeah, that was sort of where I kind of took that idea from.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
So you've kind of hinted at all the projects and games influencing music and helping you design it. Do you have any projects or anything that you've worked on where they're more musically influenced, or your music has influenced the gameplay or the development of the game?
Well, I think, certainly in Bastion, that occurred to some extent. The level where you meet Zia is sort of designed in such a way that it's like a spiral, and Zia's at the center, and the music is coming from her location, and it's a 3D stereo image, right? So it's when you're over here, it's sort of in your right ear, and then you circle around and get closer and closer. It gets louder and louder. The reverb gets less and less. So that whole level was sort of designed around featuring the song. The narrator talks about, he quotes the lyrics to you during that level. So certainly, yeah, that's an example of where the piece of music directly affected the design and the writing and a bunch of other aspects of the production.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
I was simply wondering if there was an interesting story behind you either getting into music or with Supergiant Games. And if not, what drove you to end up either in music or in Supergiant?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. I as a kid, I started doing musical theater when I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5, something like that. So I was singing from a pretty early age. And my older brother, I had older brothers who were much older than me, and they both done some of that. And so that was my first exposure to music, to making music or performing music of any kind. I mean, I sing at home for fun, but but I guess it wasn't until I was about 11 that I picked up the guitar and really was interested in making music and playing music and playing instruments. I had been fascinated by it, but never really had the motivation or guts to just go start doing it. But yeah, when I was around 11, and then I started kind of writing songs and playing in bands, and and doing all that all the way through. I'm basically still doing it. So, that's one of my main. That's my main thing. And in high school, I got really interested in recording and multi-track recording, and that was something that I was really really passionate about. That made me really want to pursue it more professionally. Was specifically the recording aspect, which is something I really enjoy, and the production aspect. For me, it uses sort of both parts of my brain in a really satisfying way. It's a very technical process that's also extremely creative, so it's really like a fully stimulating kind of process for me. And the way I got involved in Supergiant is one of my best buds growing up, this guy Amir Rao, who was the drummer in my band for years, and we played D&D together since we were little kids, and we still do. And he was working in the games industry for a few years. He was working at EA, and he decided to kind of jump ship with some other EA people and start his own thing. And he asked me to do the music, basically.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and the sound. So yeah, that's it.
Hi, red shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
But I think
true. It's biographically accurate. All
Yes,
I
it
want
is.
is to pet all the dogs.
I think it's safe to say that a lot of your music is very mellow, very somber, with your own twist of electronic or country or industrial on it. And then you hear Thrash Pack for the first time, and it's just such a wild song. And every time I have a match against the Distance, I drag it out as long as I can because I just love that track.
Awesome.
What inspired you to do such a switch up and just let yourself go?
I think the moment when you meet Barker, and just like you see, I saw his character design. I was just like, I mean, these are basically like punk anarchist dogs. I basically have to just do that. I don't really have another way to go here. Yeah. So I thought, is this gonna be too on the nose and silly? Nah. I should probably just do it. And yeah, I'm glad I went ahead and did it. It was really fun to make, and I don't get to rock out too much in the game stuff, so that was really fun. Yeah, so it was a blast to make, and yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It's a blast to listen to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You have to excuse me. I'm a little starstruck.
No problem.
So, I adore Bryn the Breaker, and when I played through Bastion and I finally finished it, I had so many questions about the history of Zealandia that I wanted to know about that I went to the soundtrack. And when I saw the title, Bryn the Breaker, it instantly, I had a picture of someone in my mind. And I always wanted the opportunity to ask either you or Logan or Jen, who do you envision when you hear that song? Or is there any other songs that you envision a character?
Well, that's interesting. Bin the Breaker, that one. So it's interesting. Greg titled most of the tunes for the soundtrack. They didn't have titles when I made them, and when we put them in the game, and they didn't have titles until we were already done with the game, basically. So we titled all the tunes, and Greg Kasavin mostly made the titles for the tracks to be sort of stuff that is relevant to the game in an interesting way, because he is the guy who knows all the answers to the questions that you have. He's who has written the sort of massive world document that he is familiar with, and maybe we'll get to reference if we want. Basically, but he's very thorough about about making sure that the world is clearly rendered, at least in his mind, so that the writing that he does can be informed by all that stuff. And then the writing, it really helps me for the writing that I do to allow it to be informed by that stuff as well, to help the pieces feel like they're rooted in the actual world itself. And on every single game, when writing lyrics, I've referred to those world documents and stuff. That doesn't really answer your question, which is who do I envision? I don't know. I mean, I think on Pyre specifically, the character themes that I did is the most specific example of wanting a piece of music to represent a group of characters or character that I've had really in a game. I mean, I guess Zia's song and Zolf's theme and all that do that in a different way, if that makes sense. But yeah, the sort of team character themes in Pyre are I think, an example of that. Yeah. Wrap it up. Is it time to wrap it up? Oh, it's a 30-minute thing. Okay, I didn't know that. All right, fair. I didn't know how long it was gonna go. I was ready. Okay, so I'm gonna ask really short questions. I'm gonna give you like 2-word answers. Everybody in line, really fast. Good, do it. Really.
So a lot of your music is we know you're very genre bending, with a lot of down-tempo, mellow stuff. What sort of put you along that thought path of music?
Yes. I don't know. So I did a thing with my friend Amir. He made a dumb rap song about Diablo 2, and I did like the beats for it. And that is, I think, where I discovered that genre of music, honestly. Like we did it like the year before I started working on Bastion. So you can look it up. It's a rap song about Diablo 2 on YouTube. But real quick, yeah.
Yes. You were talking about garage rock and wanting to do more music, maybe in that vein, being really fascinated by it.
4. Oh, it's at 4. We don't have to wrap it up. It's actually 4. Okay, cool. We're good. All right. I can give you a more elaborate answer to that. I think I basically did it. But
you've also used a lot of unusual sounds in your music, just kind of integrating them as part of the theme of the area that you're in. What are some unusual sounds that you haven't gotten to use yet, but that you really love?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Sounds I haven't gotten to use yet that I love. Let's see. I haven't found a lot of use. Well, I guess I have. I've pretty much gotten to use all the stuff that I think is cool. I mean, I haven't thought a thing would be cool and then not used it, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
I was terrified that I was about to have to condense like a blog post into a Twitter post for a second there. Anyway, first one's still kind of a yes or no question, but it all fits together. Are the world documents as crazy as we think they are? Because there's clearly a lot of lore that doesn't make it into all these games. The other thing is, how wildly different is the production side of things 3 games down the line, from making sound effects from mouth noises in Bastion and
still doing that,
and trip hop to where we are now with Pyre, where it is an integral part of the game.
Yeah. So I think the production process is unique to the game and unique to the sort of configuration of the team at the time. We were 7 people on Bastion, kind of just living, several of them were living in Amir's dad's house making the game and just in the living room. And I was remote. Now, in Transistor, we had an office, people would go in. I was still remote. And Pyre, now most of us, except for Logan, basically are in the office most of the time. So yeah, the process changes based on sort of the actual game and the configuration, if that makes sense. Yeah, the mouth noises thing, like all that stuff, like not much else. Really, the way I approach it though is the same. I mean, we're trying to like lean into our strengths. We're trying to make something that our team of people that we have can make without too many extra hands, and so we're trying to scope accordingly. And that's sort of part of what we try and do generally is to make the stuff that we're going to be able to execute well. We don't plan to have big, fully animated cutscenes because we just don't have the means to do that, so we need to find other ways. If we want to achieve something that might achieve, we find a different way to do that. And that's partially how, for example, the narration in Bastion came about, was we wanted a way to convey story in an action RPG that wasn't a cutscene and it wasn't a wall of text where you have to stop playing in order to experience the story. So a lot of the things like that are just solutions to problems that we see and that we want to try and solve in a way that, based on the makeup of our team, we can solve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Thanks very much.
Cool.
So somebody else stole my question about Thrash Pack earlier. So I guess I'm going to ask about the other kind of off-genre song for the album, which was, I believe, Coasting from Transistor.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just so different from everything else on that album. So how did that, in that game, how did that song come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it turned out pretty different from the rest of the stuff in the game, but one of the things I did want to incorporate into a lot of the music in the game was sort of like a loungy component, which I think is the connection. One of the connections between that piece and the rest of the stuff is the sort of loungy component. And at the time I made it, people were like, I liked it, but I was like, it doesn't really fit with everything else. And then once the sandbox area was created, they're like, oh, okay, well, this is perfect. I just need to put this there. So it was cool to be able to find a home for this piece that I liked, but just kind of was different and didn't really fit the locations in the game at that point. But it was one of my earlier kind of prototyping pieces where I was still just experimenting and trying to find where to go with the music.
So my question is about the humming in Transistor. Clearly we have a button to hum, and it doesn't serve any gameplay purpose aside from just adding life and character. How did that come about? Whose idea was it? And I'm just really curious to know about that process.
Yeah. So the humming was a thing that I knew I wanted to have happen during combat. And that was my initial thought, was that every piece I would have a track that is a separate stem that is just a vocal track that would be silent, and then when you enter turn mode, the rest of the music has a low pass filter put on it, and then this kind of ethereal vocal enters. And the idea behind that was to really put you inside Red's head during her sort of planning stages of the turn mode. And so, she's a singer who has no voice, so she can't actually do that really, for real. So when you go inside of her head, of course there's music, of course she's singing. That was sort of my thought. And so the humming button came about because we basically already had humming implemented throughout the whole game for every piece. So just like, well, I guess we could just turn that on command whenever we want. So Amir, I think it was Amir who actually had the idea to just like, well, let's just put that on a button and see if that is cool. And and it turned out we liked it, and that button wasn't being used for anything else. So like, all right, cool.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep.
How did Old Friends come about and become what it is now?
Yeah, Old Friends was we had a really long prototyping period for Transistor. I would say maybe it was very long. I don't know how long it was. I don't know if it was the longest, but it felt really long. And I was sort of at the beginning of that process. I think a lot of us were stumbling a little bit, trying to figure out how to make a game that was different enough from Bastion so that it had its own identity, but similar enough to Bastion so that you could tell the same people made it, and that people who liked the first one would not necessarily be disappointed by this, and et cetera. So there was some of that sort of sophomore jinx kind of stuff rolling around in our brains, I think. So I was experimenting for a while. I made a couple of pieces right at the beginning that were like, this just kind of sounds like more Bastion music. I got to make something else. And this isn't right, And then it took me a while. I made piece after piece, and it took me maybe about 6 months of experimentation to really arrive at what I felt like, okay, this is the sound. And Old Friends is the piece that I made that helped me define what the sound of the game was for myself and understand what it was better than I had before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you. That's incredible.
So, what is your relation to the actual sound design as far as when you're just talking like sound effects, so maybe like attacks? How exactly did you interact with those kind of things?
I'm not sure. Can you clarify? Because I make the sounds. I help implement them. I set them up in our audio middleware. So yeah, can you clarify a little bit?
How do you make it sure that it all sounds cohesive, basically?
Yeah. So I like to pick, theming for the sound effects. That's something that really helps me tie everything together. In Bastion, it was like building sounds. So there's like hammering, like tapping when you toggle through menu stuff, and there's like, various clangs and whacks and things like that. And that's a lot of the Bastion UI stuff was themed in that way. For Transistor, my idea was that it would be like sort of there'd be like a musical component, like sort of digital plus magic, like some weird like magic-y sort of computerized digital thing. Was my approach to a lot of that stuff for the UI specifically for Transistor, and then for Pyre, it was like books plus occult, basically. Like,
Thank you.
Yeah.
So before my question, I have somewhat of a blasphemous confession to make. For every single one of Supergiant's games, like, I wasn't quite interested in playing the game at first, and it was always like, listen to soundtrack, get halfway through the soundtrack. Oh crap, I need to actually like get this for every single one of them. And so huge fan. But the question I had was over like what media and other stuff over the past year have really interested you, whether it be like other musicians, really interesting like environmental design, or really interesting games, or like stuff that has you excited.
Sure, yeah. So I was talking about Lewis Cole and Noah earlier. Those guys are amazing. Wolfpack, I've been getting into Wolfpack lately. They're super good. That's awesome. Who else? There's some other stuff. I don't really like it, but my 3-year-old like endlessly listens to Sia. So I've been listening to a lot of Sia lately, not by choice. It's fine, if you like that sort of thing. I don't really. It's fine, But anyway, it's going in. So, and then I really loved probably my favorite game of this past year was Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle. That game was
so good,
so sick. It was so good, and it's just like made exactly for me. It's like Mario XCOM is like exactly like, yeah. It's like, oh well, that's amazing. That sounds amazing. I want to play that. I'm all about the XCOM style gameplay. So yeah, I loved it, and that game was just like took me by surprise because it didn't really have any right to be as good as it was, and it didn't make any sense that it was so good. And like every component of it was spectacular: the art, the music, animation, the game design, just the tone, everything. I was like, yeah, that was probably my favorite game of the year. And I played not a lot during the year, but then just played a whole bunch of stuff like recently, and yeah, it's still at the top for me, even after playing like all the great, awesome games that came out last year, or at least some of each of them. So yes, I think that's the answer. Thank you. Yeah.
So has there been any like piece or a soundtrack that you've worked on that like you felt was a little bit, or may have been just may not as noticed or unappreciated, but you're really proud of, and like why are you proud of it?
That's an interesting question. But before, it's strange because before I was doing games, I made stuff that I thought was cool. I thought it was as cool as the stuff I was doing for the games, but I didn't really expect people to care more about the game stuff inherently. I just didn't. I didn't understand. I don't know. I certainly didn't expect people to respond to Bastion the way they did. I liked Bastion just like I liked the thing I did before Bastion, which nobody heard. So I think I've been really lucky to have people be excited by the last several things I've done, and I don't feel like the other things deserve more recognition than they got or whatever. It's just a lot harder to make noise as like a rock band or whatever than it is to be like a game that a lot of people play and then they hear the music and become attached to it, and you just like have an easier. It's kind of like cheating. You have a much better. You have an in to those people's brains and hearts already, and like they already like the music, and then so it's a different context entirely. So yeah, I guess if that answers the question.
Apologies if this has been asked before, but what are some ways you remain productive and inspired when you're working on a large project?
Yeah, ways to remain productive. I'm lucky enough to have a bunch of different types of things that I do. So I compose music. I have to implement the music, which is a whole different kind of thing. I make sound effects. I implement the sound effects. I record voiceover. I do this. So if I'm ever kind of stuck on something, all I have to do is just pivot and do a different type of thing for a little while. And that really helps me stay productive. It's just like, all right, well, I can't think of a music thing right now. I'll just make some sound effects, or I can't, I don't feel like making sound effects right now. I'll, go and I'll do a session with Logan, and we'll get some stuff, and we'll make jokes about Star Wars for 3 hours while whatever. Yeah, that really helps me, stay productive.
Thank you.
Hey, so what I wanted to ask you about was with Pyre, as the game opens and Surviving Exile is playing, the instruments change, and it kind of reflects each character. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the process or what led you to kind of go with that, because that was one of my favorite parts about the game.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool to hear. That was something that it happened like about halfway through development, I guess, that tune, and it was when we were preparing to show the game publicly for the first time is when that came about, that piece. And I really thought it would be cool. It was sort of around the idea that I was thinking about doing character themes and things like that. And I'd never really tried doing anything like that before, but I thought a Peter and the Wolf type thing would make a lot of sense because we already have this complex stemming system where with like a million tracks playing at the same time, that we could totally do it and have tracks represent different characters, at least in the intro sequence, because we couldn't quite figure out a way to do it with like everyone for every piece. The scope would just be like way too high. So, so I couldn't quite figure that out, but I thought about it. And yeah, so that's basically how that came about, is the idea, well, we have this opportunity to really help you understand these characters immediately when you first meet them, just by reinforcing their personalities with something sonic. Does that make sense?
So because you have so many different parts of these big projects that you're in, and the music has such a deep influence on other parts of Supergiant Games, I was wondering, have there been any scenarios where you had something you really wanted to do, but it may have been too big, like you bit off more than you could chew, or you had to back down on something you thought was going to be awesome, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I was just mentioning actually is a pretty good example of that. Like, I started to approach, hey, let's do, what if we did Peter and Wolf the whole thing and did, every character has their own stem on every single piece of music in the entire game. That's just like 2 hours times 8, like I quickly backed away from that when I realized like, oh, this is a cliff. I can't go there because it'll just be a rabbit hole I'll never get out of, basically. So that's one example. And I had some more ambitions on Pyre, in fact, to do like even more reactive lyric stuff that I had to back away from because we just couldn't find the right place for that. But that wasn't really a thing I prototyped really early. Is like, I want to do a song where like you make some choices and then the song reflects the choices like in the lyrics. And I was glad we were finally able to do it, but it took like a while to really get it in. Yep.
Hey, Darren. Empire, the loot covers and the wagon that you kind of discovered in the game. Yeah. I thought it was a really cool idea. Did you perform all those yourself, or was it an actual loot, or did you kind of?
No, none of it's an actual loot. It's all basically like, it's sort of the most acoustic component of whatever song, whatever piece of music it is, and I sort of isolated that out. Some of them I edited and made them a different length because they're just not as interesting without the other stuff, so I just kind of shortened some of them. Some of them, like Dread Design, I just wrote a whole new, because there was no acoustic instruments in that tune, I like wrote a whole new thing for that one. I recorded that. But yeah, it's either like acoustic guitar or like, some of them are harpsichord and some other, auto harp, things like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have 5 minutes left, just an FYI. 5 minutes.
How would you be spending your time if you weren't making games?
Oh man, how would I be spending my time? I guess I would have to be doing a different job of some sort. Maybe that's probably how. No, I mean, if I have left my own devices, playing more games. I don't get to play enough. Playing more Rock Band. I miss that. I don't get to play enough Rock Band these days. Yeah, maybe doing more stuff with bands, trying to make a little more rock music. Yeah.
Hi. So one of my favorite draws of Bastion was the continuous narrative throughout the entire game, and that's really the hook that got me into Bastion. What are some of the challenges and complications of just designing that continuous narrative through a game when clearly you're limited on resources to make even cutscenes?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was something that took a lot of fine tuning indeed, and we set up a system where the narrator will never cut himself off. So what happens is if another line is queued up to play when a line is playing, either the line will be set to never queue, which means it just won't play, or it'll just queue up and he'll say it afterwards. And so we had basically by defining whether something should either queue or not, that was basically that. Greg and I think Amir a little bit, scripted everything by hand basically to occur based on map location or other events that could trigger these narration events basically. And if you get to a point, like if he's saying something else when you fall off the platform, he won't say, and then he falls to his death. He won't say that. So just because, we just got to make it's more important than that joke, which is fun. But what was more important than that to us was the believability of somebody like telling you a story. And so that was sort of the main focus of the way it was implemented. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, so I've heard stories of other people who work on sound design and game music. They'll get inspired by random things like, the sound of a bottle cap opening, and that'll be like their shooting sound or something like that. So what's the weirdest thing that has inspired you to put a noise or a sound in one of your games?
The thing I'm working on right now, I'm making. I was at Amir's house the other day, and I was playing tug of war with his dog, and his dog has like the best growl, like the most amazing tug of war sound. And so I'm making him bring his dog in for me to record to the studio. So we're gonna do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Maybe a similar question, but have you ever had a Tom Waits-esque moment where you're just like, none of these instruments, all they do is conform me to the instrumentation that they are, or the sound that they are, and you just like threw everything to the side and just went out and like hit trash can lids or something and tried to find like some sort of medium you would never have found if you didn't just kind of throw that to the side?
Not to that extreme, but I definitely like to write in ways that I don't fully understand. I really enjoy that. So I'll play in weird guitar tunings. I'll play instruments I don't really know how to play well, but I can mechanically play. Like I know how to play the guitar, but I can mechanically play the mandolin. I just don't know chords or anything. I don't know anything about the mandolin, So I like writing on instruments that I sort of have to feel my way around. And that's kind of inspiring, is just the sensation of just stumbling forward and having to totally just rely on your ears and your fingers and and just see what sounds cool and kind of forget everything you've learned. Cool. We got time for just one more. Last one.
Yeah, so I have a question. Yeah, I have a question regarding the transistor. So like when I first started playing the game, I like the music background. I thought, oh yeah, this is cool, but like just like generic background music for the video game. But like the moment that I really noticed that how good music was when actually when they when I think yeah transistor was talking about how the background red and then the spines started playing, and I was like, oh my god, what just hit? Like it just hit me. So like so and I know that's like a conscious design in your guys. You guys side. So like, I want to ask, like, how do you design for that? How do you design the sound for it to hit the player?
I think part of that is sort of a holistic approach from the team to try to feature things that we want the player to experience. That all that stuff is sort of like we all have to develop a conceit for that to happen from a sort of writing standpoint and a design standpoint and all that stuff. So to allow a moment like that to occur, it takes like a lot of conscious decisions by a lot of different disciplines on the team. Jen made this amazing poster that you're staring at when as part of her component to that. Greg wrote the dialogue that's happening there that add a lot of weight to that moment. That and Amir designed the level and the scenario and all that stuff. So it's sort of like I would say it's a big old team effort to make stuff like that happen. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. This was great. Some cool questions.